What's up, everybody? Jay Miller here, bringing another Productivity in Tech podcast. Now, a lot of people have wondered, like, Jay, what is it that you do? You see, I am an editor slash automator slash lots of other things, and I call myself a multi-potentialite. And one of the things in that potentialisms, making up words now, I guess I'm a wordsmith as well. But one of the things that I also do is I scour the internet looking for interesting people in tech to talk to about the things that they're doing and, more importantly, how they're managing to get it all done. And this week is no different. We're continuing down the Illuminated Bits chain. We started with Ish from Capsicum, and then we moved to the designer Heidi Helen, who helped make that app, but also just launched her brand new app, When Did I? And now we are talking with the developer that helped make that app a reality, Kyle Cronin. Kyle is a former web developer turned iOS developer who is learning through launching. And we talk a lot about the process that he has taken to get to where he is today, as well as the apps that he has built in the process over the last couple of years. And this was a conversation that was very, very hard to edit because of so much good value in it. This is one of the first times where the after show isn't the only bonus content in the podcast. There's about another hour of content inside of our normal recording time that I had to cut because it was just so long. We had about 2.5 hours to talk about many different things. Apple's take on developers, what it's like to build apps for people, what it's like to run a business, what it's like to do things on the side while you're working for someone and trying to turn that into a business. And then we also talk about tips for landing that job that you've been trying to get, or whether you actually should try to get that job. But if you want to learn more about that, you have to head over to productivityintech.com/memberships and become a member today. It not only supports productivity in tech, but it also helps me know that you are liking the things that I am putting out, and I will continue to try to find more and more content like that. But you didn't come for an ad read, you came for a great conversation, and I've got one for you. So here it is, my conversation with Kyle Cronin. All right, perfect. That easy. So yeah, as I always tell people, it's really cool setup because I literally just have a conversation. Like it's not a I'm gonna sit down and ask you a question and then like take 5 takes to get the perfect answer. It's always weird. Like when you can tell when that's happening in a podcast. I genuinely like to just get to know more about my guest. So I am going to start with you. You did mention, and this is kind of a good way for you to talk about some of the apps that you've helped to make. But you mentioned something in there that you've worked with multiple designers on these apps. So what's it like? I guess, do you have any say on the design part, or do you just like strictly do the development side?
Oh, I do. I do have a lot of input. I like to think that I have an eye for design, but I'm sort of less successful at actually kind of, blank screen, come up with something. But, if a designer kind of comes to me with a design, I usually have lots of feedback, sometimes, maybe to a point that the designer's like, okay, like, can we just build this, please? But I do think that that ultimately at the end of the day, the goal is to make the best product possible. And my feedback is, geared toward that end.
It's interesting that it's kind of like that. I'll know it when I see it kind of
right
feeling like I don't know what good design is, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
Like,
I can't tell you how many iterations we've done. We did for the logo for When Did I think it's like the 7th or 8th iteration is what we actually ended up going with. And I just kept on like, oh, this doesn't look quite right. Can we make this change? Can we make this change? Or sometimes I'll ask for a change, either for the logo or something else. And then the designer will go and make it. And I'll be like, no, I've decided I don't like that after all. Yeah.
yeah, and that's interesting too because there are a lot of applications that are like great apps with terrible logos.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I always think about that. I mean, like Slack changed their logo and it was like, all right, I'm finally used to the multicolored Octothorpe, and now you're giving me the 4 ducks. And
Oh man.
we talked earlier about you developing 2 apps. Tell us a little bit more about those apps and what kind of gave you, I guess, the inspiration to develop them, or at least to help develop them.
Sure. Yeah. So the first app I started working on, well, I guess technically the first app that I ever put out is called Activity Glance. I built it in a few weeks. It was my first app. It was basically just trying to learn the ropes of doing iOS development. I haven't updated it in more than a year. I think I put it out sometime in like May of last year. That'd be 2018, in case people are listening to this podcast far in the future. But sort of the 2 apps that I'm still currently working on, the first one I started working on is called When Did I? And it's an app I've been working on with a designer based in Australia, named Heidi Helen. But we met at the Layers conference that is sort of hosted concurrently with WWDC in June. We met at the one in 2017. And it's like a design conference. I didn't get into WWDC, so I still kind of wanted to, be part of the festivities. And so I went to Layers. People have had said very positive things about it, and I have to agree. Excellent conference. Anyway, met Heidi there. We just sort of kept in touch over the next year or so, and after I had put out Activity Glance, I was talking with her and saying, hey, I'm looking to build another app. Do you have any ideas? And we kicked a few ideas around, and she came up with the idea to track when you do things. It's a really simple concept, but it's just something that, I was kind of struck that there aren't really any sort of apps out there that are in this space, or at least none that are well known. And it serves a really useful need for, myself, for her, and presumably, hopefully, for a lot of other people. So we started working on that last summer. And, it's kind of been off and on since then. We finally put it out near the end of May this year, 2019, shortly before WWDC conference this year, which I was very fortunate to be able to get a ticket to. So I finally was able to go. My first WWDC. It was very exciting. But yeah, no, it's a simple concept, but there's a surprising amount of complexity to it. Because you put in the actions that you want to track. So if you want to track when you change the sheets, or when you change the oil in your car, or when you took the vitamins today, and you just tap the row to indicate that you've done that thing. But we've kind of taken it a number of steps further than that. So, we don't just track the latest time that you did something. We could track all the times that you did that thing. And so you can reference your history for all those things. But we're pretty proud of it. And it seems to be doing pretty well so far. So,
yeah, it's an excellent app, and it's one that I now open every day. And it's weird because now I have reminders that tell me to do things, and then I have When Did I that tells me the last time I actually did it. and it's weird because I feel like, wow, it'd be really nice if I got a notification to do this.
right.
But
Yeah.
then it becomes a reminders app at that point, and I'm like, well, I do want that, but I don't want that at the same time.
I will say that is something that we are talking about. I think that there is a potential for a future feature in there. The timing and sort of how it manifests are sort of still up in the air. But I do think that, some basic form of reminders, especially like I want to make sure that I do this thing every 6 months. I want to make sure that I change the batteries in the smoke detector every 6 months or something like that. Like if it goes more than 6 months, maybe we should tell you, just stuff like that. So, I would say that, the app that you see, even though there's, again, like I said, a lot of functionality, there is still more that we, have thought about that we haven't yet had the opportunity to design and to develop.
Definitely. And not to even to knock the app for that, because I think that, and I mentioned this to Heidi, like it's the thing that makes it so wonderful is its simplicity, and that it isn't, me changing the oil, in at least every 6 months isn't something that I necessarily need to put in my to-do list or put in my project manager. But an app like When Did that just tells me, like, if I hear a knocking in my car and I go, okay, when was the last time I changed the spark plugs, or when was the last time that I just took it in to be serviced, and I can go and get that data really quickly. Or as a parent, one of the things that we do is we track when our daughter is like sick, or like if she hasn't had like a really, really full diaper or something. We're like, hey, I haven't had to change her diaper, in like a day. Like that's not good. um and that's where I think, like you said, having those notifications and having that history and that trail, we can say, okay, well, on this day, if you look here, we did this 4 times, but then on this day it was only like 2. You can start to get some information that can be used in a myriad of ways. And I think that really, that's really cool. And you mentioned that this was an idea that Heidi had. And when you made your first app, it was an app that was just kind of, hey, I want to learn how to do this. Let me figure out how I can, sync, activity data, and then view things on the watch, and pull all that information. How different was it working on a project that wasn't your idea versus a project that was your idea?
It was different, and I would say largely in a positive way. It's so helpful to have someone that's thinking through the same, problem space that you can bounce ideas off of. Like, she'll come up with an idea, she'll talk to me, and I'll say, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea," or maybe we can do this. And it's really hard to do that alone. Or even like if you just sort of have a casual conversation with someone else, like dinner, or you go to a meetup or something like that, and you're talking with them, you can't really load in, everything you're thinking about into their mind, and then sort of be able to bounce stuff back and forth. And so that's why I found it so valuable to have been able to work with someone else, on this application. And, largely I think that, going forward, my goal will be to try and work with, at least one other person on future apps, just because I think that, it makes them like 10 times better.
I think that's an area that I'm still working on as a not a solo business owner. For those that don't know, Pitt is an official business. We have a business license and everything else, and we have clients that we work with providing editing and consulting and automation services, and basically the stuff that I like to do for fun. But my wife is also a part of the business, and she has recently started helping with editing. And it's so interesting in, not only are we able to do more work, or I guess we're able to do more work in the same amount of time as it took me to do it by myself, but there are often times where she will catch something that I missed, or she will listen to something and go, hey, why did you leave this in? Or what do you think about clipping it like this so that it's saying the same thing but more efficiently? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that. And I think that's where having a second set of eyes definitely helps, even though when it comes to the development side of things, I have always been like a solo developer. And that's not a pride thing. That is more of because I've never held a developer like only job, I still have so much anxiety around the areas that haven't been fine tuned by working in a professional environment as a developer.
Oh yeah, so I think I said earlier that I have three apps out there, and I told you guys about the first two. Their third app is an app called Slay It, that I've been working on. I was getting together with a friend, and she is a freelancer, and work was a little slow at the moment, and I said, hey, we should build an app together. Do you have any ideas? And she thought about it for a little while, and she came up with this idea, again, really simple concept, but so she's part of a Facebook community that is sort of you know empowering women to kind of help manage their exercise and eating and that kind of stuff, so kind of like a fitness community. And something that this community does is they have this, like, some of the members will post a calendar, and on that calendar they have little emojis that indicate whether or not they exercise on that day, whether or not they ate right, or whether or not it was an oops day, that kind of stuff. And she said, a lot of these people are basically just taking a screenshot of the previous day, and then they're manually putting emojis on the next day, and then they're taking a screenshot of that and posting it. And it's just, so much work to do that. And she said, well, what if we built an app for that? And so I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so it was earlier this year, put out a really simple kind of 1.0 app that does basically exactly what I mentioned. It's a calendar. You can tap on the days, and you can input, how good you were in terms of exercise and eating on those days. And that was kind of before the big push to get When Did I out the door, and released. But now I've actually transitioned back to working on the next iteration of that. Oh, by the way, the name of that app is called Slay It. I should probably tell people that. You can find it in the iOS App Store. And so now I've transitioned to back to working on the next version of Slay It. And Heidi is spending a little time working on Capsicum. So I think it kind of flows really well where, for none of us, the apps that we're working on are really the only thing that we're working on. So we're able to, like, if one person or another is busy, we have something else we can work on. So
That makes me think of two things. So I'm going to try to remember both of them. Just remind me if we just keep going on tangents. Like, no, you had a second thing. Um, the first thing on that was that that app Slay It came from a Facebook group and someone that had time and ability. And that's something that, one, shout out to all the communities out there that inspire people in tech to do stuff and create things. That is why the Pit community exists, because I like making things. And I realized a long time ago that if I put a bunch of people in a single place and just have them talk and I just sit there and listen, ideas just start flying. And then I'm able to say, oh, hey, I have the ability to build that. And or maybe someone else will say, I really like that idea, someone should build that, or I have the ability to build it, and then they build it. And so I think that's really cool that the whole concept came from someone saying, there's this thing that a bunch of people do, they already have a way to do it, but wouldn't it be nice if there was a better way to do it, or if there was a way to automate this process a little bit? And people sometimes give me a hard time because when I define like my area of expertise as a developer, I usually say I'm an automator. I say that, like, my goal is to do the things that I'm doing in a way that I build things that make doing what I do faster and easier on my mental capacity. Because as you can tell, I can get scatterbrained at times. If you ask my wife, she will tell me to do something. And then 10 seconds later, I have already forgotten what she's asked me to do. So, so it is cool to have all of these ideas in a place and see things and to look at, okay, how can I build some kind of automation? And that automation in your case just happens to be a full-fledged app.
Yeah. I didn't think about it before, but I think you're totally right that essentially it is automating a task that they were doing manually. So yeah, that's an interesting correlation I hadn't put together.
And I think that the world of app development will have to start doing that because we're getting to a point now where everything is digital. Like everything is connected in some way, shape, or form. Like I'm a bullet journalist and there is a bullet journal app. Like it doesn't make sense. Like I can't get myself to download it because I'm just like, wait a minute, writer, what are you doing? Like this is an analog format. Part of the beauty of it is that it's an analog format, but you understand there are limitations, and that's how they market it is like, hey, have you ever tried to find something and you couldn't find it? So here's a companion app to your bullet journal. Just take a picture of the page, give it some tags, and then now you can search on those tags. And it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I still don't get it, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, I was going to say, and a benefit to putting out an app that is more or less an automation is that you kind of have a built-in audience to market to. You're not trying to tell people this is something you should be doing. You're telling people, this just enables you to do what you were already doing, but faster and easier and better.
The second part of that was the thing that also makes this interesting is because you built this kind of for a community, how did that affect your, I guess, your personal goals of the application? Because you always hear developers talking about how like you can't rely on, I'm just going to build an app and become a millionaire off of it, or I'm going to build an app, give it away for free, and then put ads on it and make a ton of money from the ads.
Right.
For you, like you made an app for primarily a single person who was part of a Facebook group. So to me the goal was more like, does the Facebook group think this app is good? About like I built this for this group of people. If that group of people are happy with it, the people who aren't in that group, I don't know how I necessarily want to support or whether I even should support that group. And I think that's where developers do fall into this bad habit of putting way too much into their applications instead of just saying maybe this app isn't for you.
Yeah. Well, so I do agree with that, right? So there was a very specific audience that I was targeting with the app, and knowing whether or not that audience accepts the app or not, thinks it's a good app and wants to use it was sort of the primary metric. I would though say that the application, is built to be a general purpose application. Anyone can download it to their iPhone or their iPad and use it. It's not meant specifically like you don't have to sign into Facebook and go to that specific group, and like it's not that targeted. And something else that I would also say in terms of the expectations for how the app would perform, one of the nice things about essentially building an app for a specific audience is you kind of have a sense of like, oh, this is a Facebook group with like 10,000 people in it or 20,000 people in it, and knowing how many people download the app and use the app and continue using the app, gives you a pretty clear sense of how, like, percentage wise, how good the app is and how valuable it is to those people, as well as, kind of provides a little bit of that initial like kickstart to actually get, that first little bit of critical mass, for users of the app. I'm confident that if I built this app or a similar app and, stuck it in the app store and, tried to kind of market it by posting it, tweeting about it, they would not have, nearly the number of downloads or nearly the number of users as there were, because, there was an opportunity to essentially, drop it right in the group, say, hey, everyone, here, check out this awesome thing I built. hope you like it. And then kind of see the reaction, from there. So yeah, it's, I would say that like building it for a specific group also, elevates or not the expectations, but the hopes for how much it can potentially take off, especially early on.
Definitely. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, if I build a Slay for developers, or if you want to build a Slay, and actually that I've thought about things like that. Like there needs to be like 100 days of code, like companion app. And I could see like, okay, just fork the code on Slay It and
Hey, you want to work on it with me?
hey, if we can knock it out and put it out in a month or two, then I'm totally down, because I think that's a great idea. Nobody listening to this take that idea from us. It's ours.
Right.
But I mean, and that's the thing is like no one, well, at least I would hope that like if someone came in and said, I like this, but at the same time, I can't view my events in it. And you're like, well, I mean, yes, it has a calendar view, but it's not a calendar app. Like
Mm.
it's not like I don't think you're planning on adding the ability to create events and like getting location based notifications on, oh hey, don't forget you got that meeting tonight. Like I mean,
No, yeah.
and maybe you do, I don't know, but
Yeah, I guess kind of what I'm trying to do both with When Did I and with Slay It is to try and essentially build features that augment that core functionality. So When Did I being like, tracking, when you do stuff. And so like what other information might you want to track? In what ways might you want to view or analyze that information? And with the goal being that like, the core, experience of actually using the app for that intended purpose is, designed to be as optimized and as simple as possible. Same thing with Slay It. We have some ideas for expanding it. So, I'm currently working on a way to not just track exercise and activity, but, to have, maybe 5 or 6 things in there that you might want to track. And maybe you can provide custom things. But ultimately sort of at the end of the day, the idea is like, you open the app and then you tell the app, like, how'd you do today? You can, I did this and this and this, and then, you're off to the races. I guess I kind of like apps where you can just open them really quickly, take care of something, and then just leave.
well, and I think that needs to be the method of apps. I mean, there's this psychology, especially in the gaming app development world, of the longer I can keep that person in the app, the more that I can, I don't know, track their location and then sell that location data for profit, or feed them ads. And the more time, the longer that they're in the app, the more ads that I get to feed them, so the more money I make.
Or even just generally, I would say that, there is this idea that the more a user is using your app, like in terms of time, the better, so you're trying to make changes that will oh, how can we get the user to use the app more often or use it for a longer period of time? And, trying to optimize that metric. And what I'm worried about, for example, is there is this kind of, rumor, I'm not sure if or when it will come to fruition, but this idea that like Apple really likes these, subscription services. And they're coming out with one for games on iOS, called Apple Arcade. And kind of what worries me is that they might want to try to push this, like really start trying to push this for apps as well, of like, oh, subscribe to Apple Apps Plus or whatever, and then for $10 a month or whatever, you can then download and use all these apps. But how does Apple decide which apps get how much money? Is it just dividing by the number of apps within the subscription and then everyone gets an equal share? My guess is probably not. I'm guessing they'll probably give more money to apps that users spend more time in, which then, if you're trying to build a utility app where the whole idea is like it's beneficial to the user to be able to use it for as little time as possible, but still able to go accomplish what they want to accomplish, suddenly that becomes devalued under a system like that.
I totally agree with that. But I think that Apple already has competition in that area. And like, I don't know, are you familiar with the app setup?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I'm not really sure of the specifics.
So I'm a setup member, and I pay
Okay.
$10. I think it's either $10 or $12 a month, something like that. and it gives me access to 150 plus Mac apps for $10 a month. And when it first came out, it didn't have many, like, I won't say great apps, but it didn't have like the leaders in their respective categories. It was always like well, you've heard of this, but here's the thing that's close to it. But now they have like Clean My Mac 10, they have Endurance, they have iStat menus. I'm trying to find some other ones. Good friend of the show and someone who has been on the show a couple of times, Brett Terpstra, his apps I think Mark 2
Mm.
is a part of SetApp, and some of the other apps that he's developing. Um, I've talked with him a little bit about maybe putting those apps under SetApp. And it's great because like PDF Pen, MindNode, Bartender, Better Touch Tool, Ulysses, which like they were under a lot of heat when they switched to a subscription model. Like all of these apps are included for one price. And the thing with that is the way that they price it out is SetApp, the company, takes like a certain percentage off the top. And then from there, only apps that you have installed are entitled to the rest, and it's equally divided based on how much time you spend in the app physically. And like you said, I love the fact that they are thinking about like how can we make sure that everybody gets a piece of the pie, but at the same time, apps like Downy aren't designed like it literally helps you download stuff. Like it's like a YouTube downloader. So it's good to know that there are already people out there thinking about this problem of like how can we cure the issue of having too many subscriptions and having to constantly buy so many applications. But at the same time, it does kind of worry me that some of the apps that I rely on the most are the apps that I use the least.
Yeah, and I totally agree from a customer or user perspective. Paying one amount of money per month and just getting access to this large library of apps. There's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of appeal to that. So I totally get that. Maybe I just need to pivot to making an app like a note taking app that a user needs to have open on their Mac all the time. So. Well, you haven't had mine yet.
We have enough of those already. Like, please don't. True, true. And with that, and again, these Apple tangents, man, the after show is going to be bumping. Like one of the questions that I had was, you have 3 apps on the App Store now. Like, what's the goal?
Hmm.
Is it, hey, I'm just going to keep building apps and I'm going to maintain them all, or I'm going to build apps, let them live their lifespan, and then one day just take them off the store, or just put a note on it that says this is no longer being maintained? Or like what is the strategy here? Is it just to build a portfolio?
Yeah. So, my goal, at least in the near term, is to build a portfolio to be able to get a job developing, apps as a profession full time. And hopefully that will also give me the liberty and the time, to maybe continue to develop the apps that I've already built and maybe others as well on the side.
And that's such an interesting thought. And the reason, I thought about all of this stuff is, we were talking earlier, small, simple apps that solve one problem are great. They start off as an automation of sorts, and then they become this whole tool that's great. And then slowly you can iterate on it. And as you mentioned, being able to say, oh, I remember doing this for this application. Let me look at that code and then build it for another. Are you worried that down the road, when, you get that job as a, you know, iOS developer for insert big company, big app here, and you're now limited in how you can produce applications, whether it's a competitive thing where the company you work for maybe doesn't want you building other apps for either other people or for yourself?
Another goal of these apps is to give me, experience building things and using technologies that I can then take to building future stuff. So I did Slay It in a very compressed amount of time. Because I was able to lean on a large amount of the code that I'd already written for When Did I? I'd already figured out how to do certain things. I'd already written code to do certain things, and I could just bring that right over into the Slay It app. And like, that's another goal of mine, is to essentially, not only have a professional portfolio, but also have something that I can dip into, in the future when it's like, oh man, I need to, get the user's location again in a future app. So, let me look at the, little interface wrapper that I built for core location. Maybe I can copy that over and modify it in some way. And if it turns out that this is a component that, is very important to a large number of my apps, I can start thinking about breaking it out into its own framework, and just kind of like growing the stuff organically, but having like one thing, hopefully feed another.
So I guess what I'm asking is, if your goal is to create things that help progress you to a point where you can work on a single app or application set professionally, are you going to be okay with giving up the idea that says this is like, or I guess being okay with the idea that these are the only apps that I work on?
I've actually given that a lot of thought. That is something that's kind of occupied my mind, because I do plan on doing the job search imminently. And it's always been a professional goal of mine to, maybe it would be awesome to work for Apple someday. But, as everyone knows, if you work for Apple, you can't have your own apps out there, especially in the App Store. And like, that's something where there's that tension there where, it would be really cool to maybe kind of go there and to be a part of some of the stuff that Apple's building. But at the same time, you have to give up that amount of personal freedom. So, I don't quite know what I'm going to do there. One of the reasons why Heidi and I are distributing When Did I through her developer account is that, if on the off chance I do get a job at a company that really restricts my ability to kind of distribute that stuff, on my own, outside of the 9 to 5 that I spend for them, is that, at some point she may have to start exploring or building the app with someone else. And I'd rather have the app continue to exist and continue to improve, even if I'm not able to be the one that's, writing the code to do it. I might have to step back into a sort of more advisory role. But at this point, I'm really conflicted about that, because I would love to, I want nothing more right now than to take all this awesome user feedback and user suggestions and all these ideas that we have for the app, and to kind of build them and to take the app even further. So yeah, no, it is something I worry about.
Everyone listening, this has been a great conversation. We've already gone on tangents, so I'm sure that the after show is going to just be like ridiculous. Who knows? But if you want to get all of that content, I mean, this has been a great conversation. It's been a great episode by itself. But if you want to get the outtakes, the Apple, back and forth banter, I feel like we're on the same. I feel like we're on the same team, but at the same time, like, we have very different approaches to what we want to see, which is kind of cool. I like that. And become a member today. You not only get all the bonus content from every episode that we've put out, you also get access to our Pit Premium membership channel and in our Slack community, and you get the bonus newsletter posts that I put out that will often tell you about how Pit as a business is doing and the adventures into owning a business, running a business, doing the developer work for said business. A lot of that goes, and also gaining some really good productivity insights from the other members. But go to productivityintech.com/memberships for more information on that. But my last question for you before we wrap up is, you've got these apps, you've talked about how you've had to put them under other people just in case you ever get to that day where you're no longer able to work on the applications. Are there any plans to open source the code base? I mean, are you able to open source it? Is that something? I'm not an iOS developer, so I'd like to be one day, but I don't quite know how that works.
I mean, from a physical technical perspective, there wouldn't really be any, challenge to, sticking it up in a public GitHub repo, in terms of a legal, kind of license perspective. I'm not 100% sure. Something about the apps that I've built so far is that none of them are using any kind of external third-party libraries. Everything's just kind of using Apple's framework. So I wouldn't really imagine there's any issues kind of sticking that stuff up there. That said, I hadn't really thought about it. So probably not. I kind of think that the value in these apps is sort of them as products and not really necessarily them as technologies. And there's not really, probably, I don't know, but there's not really anything like groundbreaking under the hood. It's just a lot of, plumbing, getting this from here and updating this and that kind of stuff. And so there isn't any reason why, a skilled app developer that would like to build a competitive app, would have any difficulty doing so. So probably not.
Fair enough. I mean, and again, I am one who has never put an app out on an app store, and most of the quote unquote apps that I build are often for me. So it's like, hey, if you wanna go and sell this, then be my guest. I don't want to have to support it, so therefore I have no desire to do so.
Yeah. And I would guess, for the web stuff, because I've done web stuff in the past, it's very common that, if you want to have something that someone can download and run on their website, it is essentially already in source code form. So there really isn't a large distinction between, distributing the application, and making it available under like an open source license, other than kind of the actual licensing part. I guess, maybe this would be more akin to like you build a web app and you start up a server and you start, getting users on that particular service, and then deciding ultimately that you want to open source the code that's running that service, but that the value, I guess in my sort of view, that the primary value is sort of in the things being a product themselves, and if someone wants to copy it, I don't think that having the source code would make that much, easier. Like I just don't think that that's the hard part. Like I think the hard part is, trying to figure out what you want to build, how how that should be built. Yeah, marketing it, getting feedback from users, handling, feature requests and bug reports and that kind of stuff, versus like the actual kind of, open underlying technology.
Well, and I think having the app under someone else's name, ultimately it puts that, not necessarily the responsibility on them, but there is kind of a defined, I guess a defined line as to like, I am the developer for this app. This is
Mhm.
your app. Your name is on the app. The money that goes into the account goes to you, and then you pay me for the services that I have rendered for it. And at
Sure.
that point, it now enables you to just work on the app itself. You don't have to worry about user feedback if you don't want to. You don't have to worry about marketing and marketing budgets and advertising models and subscription, tiers and things like that if you don't want to. And the good thing is the people that you've worked with all sound like they want you to be a part of the application building process, which is good. But at the end of the day, it is their app, except for Slate, which I think is
It is for now. I mean, they're like, I I find it interesting. Like the fact that an app is under my account or someone else's account, like to me, these feel like, equal collaborations, and, whose account it is on ultimately and whose bank account it goes into ultimately, it's almost like an implementation detail. And, it made more sense for When Did I to go under Heidi's account for a number of reasons. Some of which I've already mentioned, others of which are just like, this lets me sort of hand off to her more of the responsibility of actually, maintaining the app as a business. That sort of like reduces my role in some of those areas intentionally. But yeah, like it's, I guess there is that dividing line where like, the app does have to be on someone's account, either it's mine or theirs. But to me, that line, like where it falls in relation to that line, doesn't really impact how I work on the product, how I view it. I still have a huge sense of ownership over all the apps that I built.
I'm enamored with the idea of creating things for the sake of creating them because they need to be made. I don't necessarily care if I make $1 million off of it.
I remember you kind of mentioning this particular point when you were talking with Heidi, and then obviously you brought it up a moment ago that like I almost feel that maybe you've given it more thought than I have.
I ultimately open source all of the things that I do. And it's not because, like you said, a lot of this stuff is stuff that people could figure out. Smart people can figure out, but I want to remove all possible barriers to making them or to helping them. And whether I'm the person that helps them or whether it's, dev.2 creates the 100 Days of Code app or whatever, I don't personally care as long as my family's taken care of and as long as, the thing exists.
Yeah, that's a perfectly valid approach too. And it may be different, in a vertical kind of like that where, there can be, 100 different websites that all sort of do slightly the same, roughly the same thing. But it just sort of depends on kind of which one gets traction. Again, there's not really any reason why there can't be 100 apps on the App Store that are, more or less based on the same code base. I do think that Apple kind of frowns on that. But I also think that it's maybe there's kind of benefit to sort of having just one place, like one app that everyone can kind of come to and use, as opposed to kind of diffusing that out amongst all of these other, essentially clones or essentially re-uploads of open source projects. I would just say that, like, earlier I said, that I was kind of surprised about why you were, had sort of like brought up the idea of like, this is under Heidi's name versus this is under my name. And I did sort of come up with an answer to that after I had sort of said that I couldn't possibly think of it. And I think that the difference is some people get into the independent software development business to build their own businesses, in which case having a business that has your own stuff underneath it is very important. And like having ownership of like, I built these things, I'm now distributing them. And like, I'm building like my business as a brand. Whereas sort of for me, I sort of take the more like product development approach of like, I just want this thing to exist. And whether or not it exists under my name or someone else's name, or, what the business relationships are, is sort of like all in service to actually helping that thing that we want to build actually exist.
Definitely. And as someone who's probably somewhere right in the middle of those two areas, like I want to build things and I just want them to exist, but at the same time, I want to also kind of build a business around it. Like I totally get that. So this has been fun. We've got an after show to get to, but before we do that, please let everyone know, like if they're trying to talk with you and learn more about your views on Apple or Swift development or anything, or even about your apps, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. So probably the best place is Twitter. So I am on Twitter. It's Kyle Cronin, KYLECRONIN. It's my name. I'm not super active. It kind of comes in spurts. Like I was really active for WWDC. I've kind of found it a little difficult to catch up on Twitter nowadays. But I'll occasionally post stuff. I would encourage people that, if When Did I or Slay It, or hey, even if Activity Glance sounds like it might be interesting to you, you can check those out on the iOS App Store. Slay It and Activity Glance are free, and When Did I is an upfront $2.99.
You've been listening to my conversation with Kyle Cronin. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Again, this is a really hard conversation to edit because there was just so much value in it. I really enjoyed talking to Kyle, and Kyle is actually in our Slack channel. So if you want to talk to Kyle or some other developers who are focused on being more productive throughout their day and helping one another be accountable for their goals that they're trying to achieve, then head over to productivityintech.com and click on the community button and join our Slack channel. It's low volume and everyone there is friendly. You will not be upset that you did that. And of course, if you want to get the entire conversation, then while you're at productivityintech.com, hit that memberships button and become a member today. You get access to special groups inside of the Slack channel, as well as a direct line to me where I connect with you at least once a week to see how things are going in your grind in whatever it is that you're up to or doing. And I also reveal a lot about what is happening behind the scenes of Productivity in Tech. You hear the podcast, but Productivity in Tech is also a business. We are helping developers create content that they're proud of, that you can learn from. So if you want to learn more about that, you got to become a premium member. That's at productivityintech.com/memberships. A shout out to Nadir Omawali for the use of his music, A Hustler Inspired Myself. I'm at KJAY Miller, and of course you can keep up to date with what's going on in the Pit realm at prod_in_tech. That's going to do it for this week. I'm already excited for the next conversation, but you're going to have to wait for that one. But for the Productivity in Tech podcast, I am Jay Miller. I hope you've been productive. Take care.